Lost phone. One evening, a woman came home late from work. She put her handbag down on the kitchen table and started rooting through it. Then she realized she didn't have her mobile phone with her. She couldn't remember the last time she had it. I must have lost it on the way home, she thought to herself. She went into the hallway, picked up her home phone, and dialed the number on her mobile. The phone rang for a long time, and then someone picked up, but they didn't say anything. "Hello?" said the woman. There was no answer, but she could hear someone breathing on the other end. "Hello? Can you hear me?" she said. There was still no answer, but the breathing got heavier. "Hello? Can you hear me?" The woman asked again. Then, in a low voice, the person on the other end said, "I hear you." Then they hung up. After that, the woman kept on calling her mobile, but nobody picked up. Eventually, she gave up in frustration. It was late and she decided to go to bed. When she went upstairs to her bedroom, she was shocked to see her mobile phone sitting on the nightstand. It was on silent. The postman. One day when I was 10 years old, I stayed home sick from school. I was lying on the couch watching TV when I heard a doorbell ringing. It was the postman. He told me he had a package to deliver, but it was so big that he needed me to help him carry it. I don't know why, but I knew something wasn't quite right. I didn't see his truck parked out front, and when I asked him where it was, he told me it was around the corner. I asked him why the regular postman wasn't here, and he said he was visiting family. He kept telling me to open the front door, and I said I was sick, and I wasn't allowed to leave the house. I told him my parents would pick up the package from the post office, but he said it would be too much hassle, and he told me my mom wanted me to take the package now. I told him I had to get my shoes first, and then I would come out and help him. Then, the door closed, and I locked it. I ran to the back door and locked that too. I called our neighbor, who was a close family friend, and begged her to come over right now. Then, I stood at the front window and stared at the man. When he saw me, he yelled through the door asking if I found my shoes yet. I yelled back, telling him that I called my neighbor to come help out and carry the package because she was older and stronger. He just turned around and ran off. They never caught him. I always wonder if he ever managed to trick some other kids. Who are you? One evening, when I was about 8 or 9, I was walking home from school. My mom worked during the day and usually came home later in the evening. When I got to my house, I took the key out of my pocket to let myself in, but just as I reached up to put the key in the lock, the door suddenly opened. My mom was standing there in her dressing gown. Instead of greeting me, she looked straight past me and in a stern voice demanded, "Who are you?" I turned around just in time to see a man in a trench coat hurrying back down the path and taking off down the street. The fact that my mom was sick that day and stayed home from work probably saved me from a horrible fate. The man in the truck. When I was 14, I was waiting for the bus and this pickup truck pulled up beside me. The driver kept waving at me to come closer, and he held up a map. It seemed like he wanted directions. I went over to the truck and he rolled down his window. I didn't realize what was happening until he reached out and grabbed me by the hair. I dropped my bag and ran for it as he sped off. When I got home, I woke my mom and told her what happened. She flipped out. Then we looked out the window. Surprise, surprise. The truck was sitting across the street and the man was sitting in the driver's seat, staring up at us. This is when I flipped out. My mom called the police and gave them a description, but the man drove off. Later on, the police called back to tell us that they had pulled someone over and wanted me to take a look at him. They put me in the back of an unmarked patrol car with tinted windows and drove me past the guy who had been questioned outside his truck. It was him. I almost had a panic attack. They charged him with attempted kidnapping. It made it all over the local newspapers. The spot where they pulled him over was right in front of an elementary school. And when they searched his truck, they found rope, duct tape, and an axe. Facebook kidnapping. A 12-year-old girl from Europe got a friend request on Facebook. It was from one of her classmates at school. They chatted over instant messenger, and he knew a lot of information about her and her school. He said that he had been sick for a couple of days, and asked her to bring him some books that he needed for homework. She was on her way to his house when she was passing a parked car on the street, and the door opened. A man got out and introduced himself as the friend's dad. He told her to get into his car, and he would drive them to a friend's house. She didn't want to, but he insisted. Finally, he grabbed her by the hand and tried to force her in the car. However, the girl began to scream, and the neighbors came out to see what it was all about. The man fled, and the girl was in such a panic, she forgot to take the license plate number. It turned out later that the Facebook profile had been fake. The man had followed the girl meticulously and knew everything about her. He knew where she lived, where she went to school, and which one of her classmates had not been to school that day. I'll give you a lift. When I was 13, I was walking home from school. It was a Friday, and both my parents were working, and my brother was still at school. It started to rain, and I had no umbrella. Next thing I knew, a car came along and slowed down. The driver was a guy in his 30s, and he said, "Hey Elaine, jump in, I'll give you a lift." I told him my name wasn't Elaine. He apologized and said I looked very like her, and offered to give me a lift anyway. I knew this was dodgy, so I said no. "No thanks, my house is just here," and pointed to a random house nearby. Then, I quickly walked into the entrance of the house and hid there for a few minutes, waiting for him to leave. When I walked back out, I realized he had just pulled over on the other side of the road and was getting out of his car. He knew it wasn't my house. I dropped my school bag and just took off running. He followed me. I ran all the way to my house when I remembered I didn't have any keys and nobody was home. I was absolutely terrified. I started banging on the front door, and all of a sudden, it opened. My brother was standing there. He had stayed home sick from school. I was crying so much I could barely talk, and I just kept pointing at the man coming up the road. My brother grabbed a hurley stick and ran outside. As soon as the man saw my brother, he ran back into his car, jumped in, and sped off. We didn't manage to get his license plate number, so he was never found, but I'm sure he wanted to kidnap me and possibly hurt or kill me. It was very scary, and I was so lucky that my brother was there, or I might have just been another statistic. The tall man in the park. When I was 15, my mother went out shopping and left me in charge of the house. It was starting to get dark, and I realized my little brother was nowhere to be found. I asked my sister if she knew where he was, and she said he had gone to the park around the corner to kick the football around. I told her to watch the house while I was gone, and ran off in the direction of the park. When I got there, I was surprised to find the park completely empty. I called out my brother's name, but there was no answer. I started to get worried. All of a sudden, I heard a faint, muffled noise coming from my left. I turned just in time to see a tall figure disappearing behind a large fence. I sprinted as fast as I could, and when I came around to the other side of the fence, I saw something that almost made me choke in horror. My little brother was being dragged down the alleyway by a tall man. I flew into a rage, and tears of anger streamed down my face. I ran at him, and he must have heard me coming, because he turned around to face me and dropped my little brother. The man tried to grab me, but I was running at him so fast that when I slammed into him, I knocked him off his feet. He swore and tried to get back up on his feet, but I just started stomping on his face, without stopping to ask any questions. I picked my brother up and ran as fast as I could back to our house. By this time, it was pitch black outside, and my mother was home. She was frantic with worrying, and she saw the look on both of our faces. She realized that something bad had happened. As I explained, my brother and I started crying, and my mom gave us both the biggest hug ever, and she started crying with us. A husband and wife were at home one evening when they heard a knock on the door. When they went to answer it, there was a strange gentleman standing on the doorstep. He was dressed in an expensive black suit and was holding a large briefcase. "I wonder if I might have a few moments of your time," he said. Assuming he was a traveling salesman, they invited him in. The gentleman placed his briefcase down on the kitchen table and took something out. It was a box with a single red button on top. He handed the box to the husband and wife. "Today is your luck day," he said in a calm tone. "You have an opportunity to become rich beyond your wildest imagination. If you press this button, you'll receive $1 million in cash. There's just one catch. Someone you don't know will die." Saying that, the gentleman opened his briefcase and showed them stacks of money inside. The gentleman told them he would return the next day to collect the box. After that, the husband and wife discussed the box. They argued for hours. Eventually, they decided to press the button. Nothing happened. The next day, the gentleman came back. He took the box, and in exchange, he gave them $1 million. As he was about to leave, the husband asked, "Did someone really die?" "Of course," the gentleman replied. "It happened last night. In a distant place, someone you don't know died." The husband felt guilty. His conscience was eating at him. "One more question," he said. "Yes, what do you want to know?" said the gentleman. "What are you going to do with the box now?" The gentleman smiled and said, "I'm going to give it to someone who doesn't know you."